Hello everyone, my name is Rayven. I'm the Rainbow Veteran. I use she, her pronouns, and this is the Rainbow Veteran Podcast. First off, I want to say Happy Pride, y'all. Today is the 4th day of Pride. I was supposed to record last week, but unfortunately Memorial Day hit me a lot harder this year than any other year previously. No one additional that I was close to has been lost, thankfully, but this year hit me really hard. So I ended up just taking a break and pushing the episode back. So I do apologize for that. But now I get to talk during Pride Month, the podcast's first Pride Month ever. And on today's episode, I wanted to get this done before Pride. I'm actually going to be doing a deep dive on the military ban of transgender service members. I've talked about this briefly before, but like the first Trump administration, there were many lawsuits against the ban, and these lawsuits had put injunctions or pauses on it while the legal system determined if the bans themselves were legal or even constitutional or not. But thanks to the Supreme Court on May 6th, that has changed. So I want to break it down. So first I want to talk about why there were pauses. So when the executive orders first came out, many organizations and transgender service members put in lawsuits against the administration. ACLU, I think Lambda Legal are the bigger two that are doing it. But they state that the ban breaks the Equal Protection Clause in the Constitution. With these lawsuits at the lower level courts, judge put injunctions and nationwide holds to temporarily pause the ban. So, a lot of them state that the plaintiffs, the ones suing the government, had the high likelihood of winning the case. And in turn, they put injunctions. And if you want to think about it this way, the way that I was told was a really good way to think about it is they're like bonds for court proceedings. It isn't stopping the ban from happening altogether, but instead just putting a pause on it to determine whether or not the ban can legally or constitutionally continue or not. And it just allows the court to go to each step that it can do up to the federal, like the U.S. Supreme Court, so it can be implemented or not after that decision. And we've seen a lot of things happen like that in the past, on both sides of the political spectrum. But with these pauses, they were met with criticism only from this current administration and MAGA Republicans. And I say MAGA Republicans, there are some Republicans who understand why these things happened. There was things during the first Trump administration, Biden's administration, Obama's 2 administrations, Bush's administration. Like, there's been pauses made by courts for the entirety of the country, especially when these things are going to be contested on whether or not they're unconstitutional or not. So it just seems like that, like, MAGA is really the one that has the issue with everything going on right now, because this has been the precedent for decades, almost centuries. So why is the ban coming back? Well, it's because the Trump administration appealed these injunctions to allow the ban to go into effect even with the lawsuit happening. And I don't want to say that this has been the trend for every presidency, regardless of party, but it has been done for Trump and his administration much more than any other president, because they have done so much with the executive orders that are against the Constitution and people's rights. There's been a lot of videos online where people are like, oh, well, we shouldn't have these radical activist judges, that there are these Democrat liberal judges blocking the president. And it's just a scene from, I think, it's a Jim Carrey movie. I don't want to say it's Cable Guy. It might be Liar Liar, but it's just him holding the phone going, "Then stop lying, asshole!" That kind of thing. Or, no, not stop lying. Stop breaking the law is the line. But it's funny because over half the judges are Republican judges that are doing it. Some appointed by Bush, some appointed by Reagan, and some appointed by Trump himself. So it's really funny to see these things happening, and then the Democrats getting blamed for it, when it's also other judges, regardless of party affiliation, are upholding the law and the Constitution. So with the appeal on the injunctions brought by the Trump administration, the Supreme Court stepped in and allowed the administration to continue with the ban even while there are still multiple lawsuits against the ban itself. In the Supreme Court's statement, they did not include whether or not the ban itself is constitutional or not. They didn't weigh in on that. They just basically said, oh, hey, we know there's lawsuits going on, but you can still do the thing even though you're currently being sued for it. Like, can you imagine, like, someone doing that with a crime, whether white collar or blue or not? Like, someone attacks someone and they're on trial for it, and then, like, hey, we know you're on trial for this, but you can continue attacking people. No, they're going to get their ass thrown in jail. And that's what these pauses, holds, injunctions, whatever you want to call them, that's what they did. They basically put the person in jail and then awaited trial. It's so stupid. It really is. I want to add that I think this creates a horrible, horrible precedent that even if the government is in the middle of lawsuits of doing something potentially unconstitutional, that it can continue to get away with it without any safety nets in place until the Supreme Court makes a decision. And that is just so stupid. It is really stupid because checks and balances. Like, the court, the whole court system is supposed to be a check and balance for the presidency and the Congress on things that are being done, whether they're constitutional or not. Congress makes the laws. Congress makes everything. The president can veto them, or the Supreme Court could be, hey, that's not constitutional or not. But also Congress can kind of vote and override things too. So it's really stupid to see that the Supreme Court just basically said, hey, we're going to take away one of the abilities of the checks and balance system that our founding fathers put in. And I noticed that a lot of folks are also, I'm going on a little tangent, but I do want to talk about this, that a lot of folks are talking about how the court system is trying to usurp. I've heard Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and a lot of MAGA Republicans, even Caroline Leavitt, talk about how the courts are usurping the authority of the president. Funny, we usually don't hear that word outside of kings and nobility. But, you know, America doesn't have a king. So, going back to the actual topic, what is the ban? Like, what is the breakdown of the ban? And so I have the memo brought on by Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, pulled up here, dated for May 8th of this year. It says, Memorandum for Senior Pentagon Leadership Commanders of the Combatant Commands Defense Agency and DoD Field Activities Directors, subject implementing policy on prioritizing military excellence and readiness. As the President of the United States clearly stated in the Executive Order 14183, titled Prioritizing Military Excellence and Readiness, on January 27th, 2025, expressing a false, quote, gender identity divergent from an individual's sex cannot satisfy the rigorous standards necessary for military service. Which we already know that's bullshit, because we just had Air Force. He was Air Force. An Air Force Academy graduate the academy was doing excellent in PTs. He's a trans man and was basically told, if you don't voluntarily separate, because we're not commissioning you as an officer, you're going to have to pay back the U.S. government everything in tuition. Which, first, that is so fucking stupid, either way of the coin, because you're going to make someone go into debt after you gave them a guaranteed job and funds to do what they do, which they've done nothing wrong. They are able to do everything that they're supposed to. But if they do sign that voluntary separation paperwork, you just gave someone free tuition for 4 years. Wait a second, I thought you MAGA Republicans were against giving people free education. See, this is what I hate about MAGAs. They are so contradictory, and it's like talking to a squirrel with 3 personalities. It is horrible. Service by individuals with a current diagnosis or history of or exhibiting symptoms consistent with gender dysphoria is not in the best interest of military services and is not clearly consistent with the interests of national security. Why not? Why not? Our allies have transgender service members. They're doing fine. In fact, they're excelling. Why is this an issue? And I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh, well, it's because I can't deploy. Yeah, okay. First off, fuck you. In the Navy, our ships have pharmacies in them. And even if it was someone going into a combat zone, they would know, hey, I'm not going to take my HRT for a little bit. And that's fucking fine. That is one thing that our community is willing to deal with when serving is, hey, I might not get my meds for a little bit. That's okay. I still signed up to protect this country because I believe in it. Even though it's turned its back on me, I believe that it could be better. So I'm going to be a part of that to help make it better. And honestly, a lot of service members and veterans are against this ban. Surprising. And also with the gender dysphoria thing. I have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. I don't really get gender dysphoria at all. The reason I found out about how I'm trans was, hey, I don't really feel like a guy. I never really connected with that. And that came after an experience where I grew my hair out a little bit because I was planning to donate it. And my girlfriend at the time parted it and put a red in my hair and said, I look like a girl, and my heart soared. And it was, why does that feel right? Why does that sound right? Don't have time to unpack that. Let's just put that in the closet. Literally. But because our system is so bullshit with trans people, you have to have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria to be able to start HRT, to be able to do anything with the systems. And that's just so fucking stupid. And that's a topic for another day, honestly. Going back to the memo, on Tuesday, May 6th, the U.S. Supreme Court granted U.S. government the requested stay of preliminary injunction in Schilling v. United States. As a result, the following policy memoranda are reinstated effective immediately. Secretary of Defense Memorandum Prioritizing Military Excellence and Readiness, February 7th, 25, of Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness Memorandum, Additional Guidance on Prioritizing Military Excellence and Readiness, February 26, 2025. Office of Assistant Secretary of Defense for Manpower and Reserve Affairs Memorandum, Clarifying Guidance on Prioritizing Military Excellence and Readiness, February 28, 2025. Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Manpower and Reserve Affairs Memorandum, Clarifying Guidance on Prioritizing Military Excellence and Readiness, Retention and Accession Waivers, March 4th, 2025. Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness Memorandum, Prioritizing Military Excellence and Readiness, Military Department Identification, March 21st, 2025. Jeez. They made a lot of memorandums for this crap. You think it would be better just to try fixing the issues with the military, like the housing situations and the mold and the retention and recruitment issues, but no. We're going to make trans people number one priority. In accordance with policy now reinstated, service members who have a current diagnosis or history of or exhibiting symptoms, which this is going to be a bullshit thing because some asshole NCO can even just throw this showing symptoms consistent with gender dysphoria. So what? We're just going to target women personnel now that serve in the military with the G.I. Jane haircut? Because I feel like that's going to be weaponized. And not by all. I feel like it's going to be a very, 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 very small 10, 20 NCOs. But the fact that it could happen and might happen is fucking bullshit. Because I've seen that happen with the trans bathroom bullshit. A very masculine woman walking into the bathroom being like, "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. No trans people in the bathroom." And I'm being nice because Karens are usually like, "Get your trans ass out of the bathroom." When it's a cis woman, yeah. That happened, and one woman got hurt for it. Literally got assaulted physically because of that. And she was cis. So this is just opening up another can of worms to attack other people in the military. Let's see. Symptoms consistent with gender dysphoria may elect to separate voluntarily. Such service members may also be eligible for voluntary separation pay. The eligibility window to self-identify for voluntary separation is extended to June 6th, this Friday, for active component service members and July 7th for the reserve component service members. Additionally, the military departments will immediately begin processing for separation service members who previously self-identified for voluntary separation prior to March 26, 2025. On conclusion of the self-identification eligibility window, the military department will initiate involuntary separation processes pursuant to the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness Memorandum, prioritizing military excellence and readiness, Military Department Identification, March 21st, 2025. The Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness is authorized and delegated the authority to provide additional policy and implementation guidance as needed outside the normal DoD issuance process to ensure swift implementation of this direction. This authority may not be further re-delegated. Signed, Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense. And see, that's a huge issue with that, because that's a lot of word salad, and it may sound like I just spewed a bunch of nonsense altogether, but if you were in the military, you understand that shit is pretty much protocol writing on the T. So, basically, if you're self-identifying, from what I've heard from people talking about it who are trans service members, if you are voluntarily separating, you're going to get all your stuff checked. They're going to medical. They're getting all this stuff to get service-connected that they may have issues with, like physical issues. Making sure all the processes, all their T's are crossed, all their I's are dotted. And they're making sure that they're going to be okay coming out. Apparently, if you get involuntarily separated, that is going to be grounds for a dishonorable discharge, which I think is fucking bullshit. And it's just don't ask, don't tell again, but with a trans font. And that's all it is. That's all any of this is. It is literally just the lavender scare, but for trans people. Because Republicans, and I say Republicans because for the longest time it's been Republicans, have been basically going from scapegoat to scapegoat to scapegoat, trying to attack a community, a marginalized community. And don't get me wrong, Democrats do it too. There are some Democrats that do it too, but on the majority side, it is Republicans. Going from scapegoat to scapegoat to scapegoat, and basically trying to find a boogeyman and ignore any of the actual issues going on, and use that as a distraction while they help their elite corporate buddies out. And it's funny because the party of small government is really doing a lot of big government bullshit lately, haven't they? Edit. So what happens now? Well, there are still several lawsuits going on, and in fact, thanks to the memo getting released, in a filing, lawyers representing transgender service members, the lawyers pointed to Hegseth's memo as evidence that the ban is discriminatory. The directive restates the unsupported assertion that expressing a false gender identity is divergent from an individual's sex, and it cannot satisfy the rigorous standards necessary for military service. Further, corroborating the district court's finding that the transgender military service ban was motivated by animus against transgender people as a group. This is a quote from Jennifer Levy, Senior Director for Transgender and Queer Rights at GLAD Law, in a letter she wrote to the Court of Appeals in the D.C. Circuit. Now, not every transgender person is diagnosed with gender dysphoria, but the Pentagon has said that it does not track whether someone is transgender, so a gender dysphoria diagnosis in a service member's medical record is the department's best and only way of 100% determining whether or not a person is transgender or not. Defense officials at the Pentagon have not been able to say what specific processes are in place to prevent non-transgender troops from saying that they are transgender as a way to leave the military early, which you know some shitbags are going to do. In a similar instance, it is not clear how officials will track down transgender troops who have not been diagnosed with gender dysphoria and choose not to come forward. One official, however, said those answers may come when the individual service members eventually release their specified policies. After the voluntary separation window closes in June, in literally 2 days, for active duty service members and July for reserves, the Pentagon will begin involuntary separations. A defense official told military.com, and I was reading an article, and so I wanted to put this, that the separations will be based on review of medical records. They added those reviews had not begun yet. So what are the effects? So this is coming from transequality.org, and this is going to basically be me reading a bit of the effects that this is going to have, because they're an advocacy group for transgender people. And I'm going to tell you first and foremost, before I even read any of this, it's going to have an effect of morale. Because you're going to be losing roughly, estimate, 15,000 service members. A drop in the hat if you look in the grand scale of the military, right? But not a drop in the hat when you realize a lot of them are service members. A lot of them are key personnel that support the infantry and the Marines who go into combat. Like the support network for the combat roles are going to be losing a lot of their people. And then you're going to have, we already have a recruitment and retention issue, right? Like, people are getting stop-lost right now. People who are about to leave the military, and they're getting stop-lost. That hasn't happened in a while, y'all. Like, so that is basically, for those of you who don't know what stop-loss is, it's basically saying, hey, I have this date of getting out. No, you don't. We're telling you you don't. You are involuntarily staying in the military. Unless something happens to you. And that, I think the last time that happened, that was like, what? 2011? Give or take? About that ballpark. But still, like, that is something that really doesn't happen outside of war. So something big might be coming around the corner. Or they're just like, hey, we can't keep people. Well, you think you're going to keep people when you're kicking out 15,000 people? And other people who are actually friends with these folks, people who actually care about their fellow service members, most of the military, they're going to look at this and be like, well, that's stupid. Why should I stay in this if this freaking government can just turn their backs on the regular people? It's stupid. It's going to hurt retention, and it's definitely sure as shit is going to hurt recruitment. Because during the first transgender ban, I almost went back into the military. I was in Penn State, and I was thinking, maybe I should try the academy, Or maybe I should join Penn State's ROTC program. Join up, go back into the military as an officer. So I thought about it. I was getting stuff done. I was getting paperwork looked at. The ban came through, and guess what? Everything came to a fucking halt. So instead, I couldn't go back into the military. Which, I still have that itch. I still have that itch to go back into the military, but I'm rated too high with disability. I can't, even if I wanted to. And I sure shouldn't, because I physically can't anymore. So let's see what these the transequality.org website says. So let's see, breaking down pretty much everything I said. So how does the Trump administration attempt to justify this policy? The new policy asserts that the presence of transgender service members is not in the best interest of the military and, quote, not consistent with the interests of national security, end quote. Generally, eligibility for military service depends on satisfying DoD accession standards with specified age, health, fitness, citizenship / residency, education, and aptitude requirements. This policy now characterizes transgender people as incapable of the military's high standards of readiness, lethality, cohesion, honesty, humility, uniformity, and integrity, which it doesn't, because they have a history and or signs of gender dysphoria. According to the DoD, this creates medical, surgical, and mental health constraints on an individual. You still let people with PTSD serve in the military, like, with records of having PTSD, and you still like, yeah, you're good. Drink some water, have some Motrin. I know a guy who literally is an amputee in the Army. I don't know him personally, but I know of him. Doing skateboard tricks. He's still in the Army. Make it make sense. DoD additionally justifies this discriminatory stance by stating, quote, some policies and spaces in the military are different for men and women. That's true. That is true. Birthings, where people sleep, where people shower, these are all separate components, right? You do realize we used to not have women in the military, and then we had to make space for women, right? So if you're really that banged up about it, just make one bathroom gender neutral. Or just let people go into the bathroom that goes with their gender identity. Then you don't have to do extra shit. Because no one was having a problem with it during the last administration. I mean, civilians and politicians were, but like, really on the whole for the military, nobody fucking cares. In practice, however, the military regularly grants waivers for service members who do not meet the essential standards for medical issues, physical fitness, criminal conduct, and drug use. This is true. Provisional enlistment policies exist for service members who fail to meet fitness, body fat, or test standards. Recently, the Army has been deviating from their own rules and enlisting soldiers with up to 55% body fat to help meet their recruiting goals. And this is something that happened with the Navy too. We're able to accept people that don't have a high school degree. You have to have an ASVAB score of 50 or more, I think. It's either 50 or 55. But you don't have to have a high school degree to join the Navy now. You can get a waiver for that, as long as you pass the ASVAB of a certain level. So, like, we're already changing the rules. If we're so, like, worried about having military members stay in the military, maybe we should just let trans folks stay in the military, okay? Neither the January 27th executive order nor the DoD memo and policy offer any explanation why the military's integrity and readiness are not threatened by making exemptions for service members who are out of shape or who are otherwise don't meet any standards, but transgender people who are already serving with distinction must be fired. They say who's impacted by the policy. We already kind of talked about that as well. Can service members get a waiver to keep serving? According to the policy, service members may be considered for a waiver on a case-by-case basis, provided that there is compelling government interest in retaining them, probably if their job's important enough. And the service member who otherwise meets criteria also meets the requirements of demonstrating 36 consecutive months of stability in their sex assigned at birth without distress or impairment, and demonstrates whether they attempted to demonstrates that they never attempted to transition. I don't know why I can't read today. And is willing to and able to adhere to all sex-based standards associated with their sex assigned at birth. So basically, use me for example. I would have to act like a man for 36 consecutive months without any issues. I would have to demonstrate that I never attempted to transition. Too late. And I would have to be basically going to all of the standards for men. So I'd have to do the men's PT scale. I would have to do all the men's grooming standards. And it's really fucking stupid that this is the hill they're wanting to die on. But, like, again, you can have someone who's trans who don't want to medically transition and still use she, her pronouns or they, them pronouns. It's really weird. The provision creates the illusion of a waiver process, but it's designed to be practically impossible to meet for most trans people. Yes, I would say about 90%, maybe 80% being generous. In practice, nearly all service members who meet the separation criteria will be denied waivers, as the standards for retention are deliberately vague. This DoD discretion to reject nearly all waiver applicants, ensuring only a handful of transgender individuals, if any, are retained. Edit. Ensuring that only a handful of transgender individuals, if any, are retained. Additionally, there are no clear guidelines for what constitutes a compelling government interest under the policy. This will make it nearly impossible for service members who meet the separation criteria to challenge a waiver denial, because it is vague as shit on purpose. Additionally, civilian courts and administrative agencies have recognized gender dysphoria as a protected disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act and similar laws, but this policy prohibits service members who meet the criteria for referral to the Disability Evaluation Services to determine if they are being medically separated for service despite this. And I think the thing that irks me a lot is being trans is not a fucking disability, okay? Gender dysphoria is not a fucking disability. But because we live in such a medical fucking bullshit big pharma world here in the country, we have to do that, or else having anything approved to get any medical transition resources is such a fucking pain. So how is the military discharging service members who are trans? The policies direct the Secretaries of the Army, Navy, and Air Force to establish procedures to identify service members who meet the separation criteria. And before anyone gets on my ass about this, Secretary of the Navy also is in charge of the Marines. And I'm 50% sure the Secretary of the Air Force also oversees the Space Force. And the Coast Guard, you're under the Secretary of Transportation. I'm sorry, y'all. Let's see. They begin the discharge procedures for those members within 30 days of them being identified. Service members discharged under this policy will receive an honorable discharge unless a review of the member's records otherwise warrants a lower characterization, which is good. Because a dishonorable discharge, even if you didn't actually do something wrong, like if, you were kicked out of the military under the Don't Ask, Don't Tell era and you were dishonorably discharged, is a big fucking negative to have on your back. Edit. The policy requires the administrative separation of enlisted service members who meet the separation criteria prior to the expiration of their term of service if the branch determines, quote, that doing so is in the best interest of the relevant military service, end quote, and of officers whose retention is not, quote, clearly consistent with the interests of national security, end quote. Given that it is unlikely that any given service member who meet the criteria will qualify for a waiver under this policy. This criteria ensure that most, if not all, trans service members will be removed from the military. The provision targeting officers is particularly concerning, The phrase not clearly consistent with the interests of national security is a loaded question that has historically been used to justify discrimination against gay people, women, and racial minorities within the military. This language reinforces false and discriminatory narratives about the ability of transgender people to serve effectively. Service members who meet the criteria identified by this policy will be administratively separated and retain administrative processing protections. While this section claims to offer protections by citing administrative processing rules, the reality is that transgender individuals will most certainly be separated regardless of their performance, readiness, or ability to serve, and with no justification aside from them being trans. Once a service member who meets the separation criteria has been identified for separation, they will be removed from deployable status until their discharge is complete. Once they are discharged, they and their eligible family members will still have access to medical care through TRICARE for 180 days as required by the separation federal law. DoD will waive any remaining military service obligation. The policy permits a 30-day window after the assurance of the policy for service members to elect for voluntary separation. The window was paused while the policy was blocked in court, with the Supreme Court allowing the policy to go into effect, blah, 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 blah. We already did this. Let's see. Here we go. While the policy... Oh, actually, no, I want to go up a space. The policy identifies several incentives for service members who accept voluntary separation, including access to voluntary separation pay and no requirement to back pay any bonuses that they have received during their career. All other service members who meet separation criteria are subject to involuntary separation. The policy contains a provision allowing DoD to require those who were involuntarily separated to pay back any bonuses that they received in their career. Involuntary separated service members have the option to request a review for the discharge by the Administrative Separation Board if they're enlisted, or the Board of Inquiry if they're an officer. They may also receive involuntary separation pay, which is significantly lower than voluntary. Service members who meet the separation criteria and have reached the 18 to 20 year mark of their military service are eligible for early retirement. While the policy holds out separation pay as an incentive, not all service members are eligible for separation pay. Separation pay also reduces eligibility for VA benefits. Similarly, while policy acknowledges that the service members have administrative protections under federal law and can request a formal review of their separation, it seems unlikely that any transgender service members will be able to avail themselves of these protections successfully and remain in service. The policy also includes language specifically for allowing administrative or disciplinary action for service members who meet the separation criteria and who refuse orders to comply with applicable standards and otherwise do not meet the standards for performance and conduct. This leaves the option open for the DoD to take actions that may reduce a service member's eligibility for separation pay and or VA benefits. It can even reduce the categorization of their separation to something that less than honorable, or such as a general discharge, or even down to a dishonorable. How does this policy affect new recruits or students? The policy applies to any new enlistees, commissions, cadets, senior reserve officer training corps or ROTC contracts, delayed entry program. I don't know why I said enlistment. Regardless of their ability to meet military, physical, or standards, anyone who meets the separation criteria is automatically disqualified from induction. For those individuals who've already signed contracts, undergone medical evaluations, or prepared for service, this section cuts off their career before it even starts. This pressure recruiters and training centers to identify and disqualify any transgender applicants before they've even reached boot camp or initial entry training, and provides an additional hurdle and deterrent to discourage even those who might be candidates for waivers. Under this new policy, people who meet the separation criteria can no longer access military officer training programs at the college level. Incoming cadets at service member academies will have their offers rescinded if they are found to meet the separation criteria. And while this section does allow students who meet the separation criteria to attend ROTC courses that are open to all students at their institutions, they cannot contract with the military to pursue officer training. Students who remain in ROTC classes will be forced to comply with gendered appearance rules, further deterring transgender students from participating at all and posing potentially serious safety risk for those who do. Impact medical care for service members. Do I want to go over this? That just seems like it's TRICARE stuff, and there's not a lot going on about it. What are the sex-based restrictions on service members? Under the new policy and all official documents, incoming identification cards, medical records, personal files, and administrative paperwork must align with the service member's sex assigned at birth. Previously, military system allows for gender marker changes. The new policy both disregards a service member's legal identity and creates additional barriers to accessing healthcare benefits and identification documents. The policy also restricts access to restrooms, showers, and sleeping areas based on sex, which I kind of talked about earlier. It ensures that all gender-segregated spaces within the military, such as barracks, showers, and restrooms, are strictly categorized male, female, or family use. The designation of family use may offer a neutral option in some circumstances, but it is not likely that something will be available generally to transgender service members, which, makes sense if you're on a ship. Because you have to build it or repurpose one that's already, incentivized or set up as one. But this policy allows for exceptions only in extreme operational situations, but it does not override the policy's overall exclusionary framework. By burdening commanders with enforcement of these restrictions while forbidding accommodations in standard military environments, the policy reinforces the myth that transgender service members are a disruption to military operation rather than acknowledging their proven ability to serve effectively. Talking about grooming. Let's see what we can do next. Actually, I want to read that. I want to read that because I already kind of touched on grooming standards. It goes into more details, but it doesn't really need to be said. There are resources available to help you. Please consider exploring the resources below to learn more about your rights and how transgender and LGBTQIA+ focused military and veterans organizations are responding to this ban. There's Modern Military Association of America, and a group I'm a part of, but haven't really been getting any sit reps for, is the Transgender American Veteran Association. If you can, educate your friends, neighbors, and colleagues about how this policy impacts you and your family. Cisgender people are often unaware of the realities of trans people's lives. You should also consider reaching out to your senators and representatives in Congress and to your state and local lawmakers and insist they take immediate action to protect trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming service members who are impacted by this policy. So that is a huge response, and I know I just spoke a lot about what the effects are for the military. And it's going to be horrible. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to be really, really bad. And before it gets any better, it's going to get real shit. And it's just bigoted hate towards a community that honestly is steeped in religious-based hate. I'm going to be real with y'all. The Lavender Scare and now with transgender people, all the hate and bigotry towards it just comes from Judeo-Christianity and the Abrahamic religions. That's all it is. And I have no hate to the religions, but the moment you start weaponizing your religion to spread hate, that's when I have an issue. And I know it's just a bastardization of the religion because it just helps the patriarchy, but it's also used to, like I said earlier, it's a fucking scapegoat. And so they use religion to help justify creating this scapegoat mentality. And it's bullshit. So fuck you, Heritage Foundation, and fuck you, Trump administration, and fuck you, Doug Collins, and Pete Hegseth, and all your fucking bullshit cabinet. Before I get to the conclusion, there is something important I do want to talk about, and that is actually something with what I'm going to be doing here soon. So, for those of you who don't know, if you're not following my TikTok or my Instagram or my YouTube, like shorts and all that, on June 6th, the same day that the voluntary separation for the active duty, is going to affect, there is a march and rally to the Capitol. And this is the Unite for Vets rally on the National Park of DC. And the reason is vets, regardless of orientation, religious background, minority status, rank, we are all marching on DC like a second bonus army to the military because the cuts. It is honestly the cuts. They use LGBT people, cut our care, minority veterans, cut their care, and are fucking with us, honestly. And now this 15% or 83,000 fucking job cuts that I want to do my best Collins impersonation. It's just a number. It's just a number. It's just a goal. We're not going to hurt doctors and nurses, even though there was a leak of the potential of cutting 4,000 fucking doctors and nurses altogether. So fuck that noise. And if that's not a real number, why is it your goal? So you want to make us, have like 20,000 service members edit. So you want us to have 20,000 support employees for all the doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals? That's fucking stupid. I'm sorry, that's fucking stupid. So a lot of us are marching on June 6th. If you're hearing this from the future, I'm going to be doing an episode on that to talk about that. And so if you can come to DC, please join us. If you're an ally to veterans, if you're a veteran, if you're an active duty service member, you can come. Just don't wear your uniform, if I'm remembering the UCMJ correctly. But please come in support of us. If you're a politician and you're against these VA cuts, please speak up. Join us. Don't be afraid. Because we will see the people who stand with us, but we'll always remember the people who stood against us or stayed silent. So that's June 6th at DC at 2 p.m. If you are unable to come to DC, I have heard rumor, I can't confirm nor deny this, that there are people going to their local VA hospitals and protesting there, outside their Capitol building in their state, or just their local politicians' offices. Don't stand idly by while we have the promise of our care being ripped away from us. And with that, I am going to go to my conclusion. Even though the amount of personnel being removed by this grossly discriminatory executive order is small comparatively to the entirety of the military across 6 branches, it is still a significant amount of people leaving the military. As I said, this will affect morale, and it will cost, I didn't bring this up earlier, I should have, it'll cost the DoD roughly $1 billion on the low side to train all the replacements. And this is just based off of only enlisted. That is if everyone's an enlisted, so that is very on the low side. This ban is made out of bigotry, hate, and ignorance, and it will negatively impact the military and the government as a whole. It ultimately does not do anything good or helpful to the everyday American, nor does it make our military any stronger or better. So as always, folks, I want you all to stay safe, stay vigilant, stay hydrated, and if you're coming out to DC, I'll be there, so feel free to say hi. Oh.